Foremost, a brand is the mental representation of an actual object, a cluster of condensed information both of a semantic and an intangible emotional nature. It triggers a chain of connotations and can therefore be seen as a shortcut into the long-term memory. A brand, therefore, is nothing else but the sum of all assumed features of an object existing only in people's minds. So in a nutshell, you could say the brand is the customer's idea of a product. Now, when you think about that, that is really a great advantage when it comes to making important decisions. By relying on the brand, you don't have to assess every little single detail of the product that you're about to purchase. And I would argue that most people really just rely on what they know of the brand to then deduce the characteristic of the specific object. In doing so, we all reduce complexity, which is psychologically necessary for all of us to process the vast number of bits and chunks of information that we're confronted with every day. And stereotypes and prejudices are a byproduct of that. I'll give you an example. Why exactly, for instance, a BMW engine is a better piece of machinery than an Opel engine, only engineers can really answer, but we all believe it to be true because that is part of the BMW brand identity. Now, about the notion of identity and image, the distinction is really important when we talk about brand management and nation branding. The identity can be regarded as the sum of all features a brand possesses. That would be its origin, its personality, its values, and its vision. So everything that hopefully sets the brand apart from its competitors. And since everything except for the origin is artificially constructed and defined by those who invent and manage the brand, you could also say that the identity is the self-perception of the brand. The image then is the perception of the identity on the side of those targeted. It is the core task of those responsible for brand management to create an image that resembles the identity as accurately as possible. So it is not the it that leads people to make a certain decision, it is the perception of it, because we all act psychologically and not logically in many ways. Having said this, I think it is fair to say that a brand can be a lot more than just a detergent or a certain type of car. In fact, you could change the definition a little bit like this. The brand is someone's idea of a country, because just like products, do countries compete with one another in a globalizing world? For qualified workers, for scientists, as a tourist destination, and of course through its products on international markets. And just like the name of a product does the name of a country trigger powerful images, probably much more powerful than any consumer brand could accomplish. And just like the BMW engine I mentioned earlier, being part of the greater category BMW, everything within or originating in a certain country, be it persons, products, or services, is being evaluated on the basis of the knowledge of the origin. Again, for complexity reduction and risk avoidance, we all make use of the information that are at our disposal, and the origin is very powerful because salient one. In fact, research has shown that the more important a decision is to us, the more we rely on our feelings rather than hard facts. And even if in some corporate headquarters, numbers get run hundreds of times to produce some sort of statistic evidence why to build a factory here and not there, your country has to be put on the most favorite list in the first place to choose from, to actually look at, out of almost 200 possibilities, as yet another country in the international supermarket, so to say. Okay, I would like to show you a little example, a little bit interactive example to show how powerful this might be. Think you plan on buying a new TV set, and you walk over to your nearest dealer and you find two models right within your price range. One is a little bit less expensive than the other one. Both have been tested and received pretty good scores, 1.8. So far there is only the information about the performance and the price. You don't know the brands because you've never heard of them, because you might not be into the whole technology thing. The one thing you do know though is, when you read the label at the back, that one is made in Japan and the other one is made in North Korea. Okay, so I would like to quickly count hands. Which one of you would prefer the Japanese TV over the North Korean one? Okay, may I ask how many of you have had first-hand experience with North Korean technology products to base your decision on? None, okay. I don't assume to speak for everybody in this room, but I would suspect that mental snapshots like these come up when I mention the names of the country. And I would also suspect that building up on these images, there is a tendency that people would expect the Japanese TV to work for 15, maybe 20 years, whereas they wouldn't trust that much in the North Korean counterpart. In fact, the brand Japan, in this case, is worth 20 euros. Of course, this is an extreme example to make my point, brainwashing you with all these images, but very often the image of a country is pretty much accurate. But sometimes people abroad have the complete wrong idea. And sometimes they don't have any, so they suffer from the invisibility problem, which His Excellency the Irish Ambassador mentioned earlier during the conference. So in branding terms, there are strong, meaning well-known but negatively charged brands, and weaker brands that people just don't know what to think about. When we look at these pictures, we should look at what makes a national identity and what exactly is responsible for these images that we get out of that. In fact, there are many different elements that account for it. Roughly, it can be broken up into these categories, and every element induces certain characteristics to the national identity, from which again the image and thereof the perception of the individual elements are deduced. We heard the example of IKEA yesterday here as a brand which is contributing to a large extent to the positive image of Sweden abroad. And except for history, that pretty much works both ways. I mean, I do remember that there were some notions of German tanks when the British press referred to our soccer team during the championship. So that there on the top just went straight to the bottom. Given the importance of the national image, there is a growing interest in national governments, of course, to build, manage, and maintain a strong positive reputation for their country, thereby improving international competitiveness for the sake of the national stakeholders. In order to measure complex matters like this, Simon Anholt, who we've heard of before, of course, introduced the Nation Brand Index in 2005 in assessing a country's reputation according to these criteria here: the appreciation of a nation's heritage, its contemporary culture and sports, the perception of the national government, the reputation of national products and services, and, of course, perceptions concerning the population of the country in terms of friendliness and education. Moreover, the Nation Brand Index assesses the attractiveness of the country in terms of investment, tourism, and even immigration. I'd like to come to my first example. Unlike consumer brands, national identities or nation brands cannot be invented from scratch. They have to be discovered and revealed because there is already a lot of information available and in the heads of people. And as it is hard to say what the building looks like that we're in right now, as long as we're inside, you should maybe wander over to the neighbors and have a look at your place from the distance to get an idea about this. I took this picture of a Mercedes in downtown Melbourne, Australia, a couple of years ago. So far, maybe nothing out of the ordinary, but you see, Australian license plates normally look like this one here, which is a combination of 3 characters and 3 digits, and depending on the state you're in different colors. Whereas this one here is a regular German license plate. So I was a bit surprised by this, and I asked some Australian friends of mine, and they told me that there exists the possibility for car owners to pay an extra amount of, like, I think 400 or 500 Australian dollars to get license plates like this. And I asked them why they would do such a thing, and they explained to me that by doing so, these people wanted to add an extra amount of prestige to their vehicles by making it appear German in the last little detail. I found that funny because here you see people are trying to keep their license plates as short as possible to make them look Australian or American. So I don't know. Anyway, what I learned from this observation was the fact that outside of Germany, Obviously, customers are willing to pay a considerable amount of money for assumed features that come with the brand Germany, indicating a comparative advantage for nationally branded products and services that I would call the Deutschland factor. Interestingly, that hasn't always been quite the case. Originally, the label Made in Germany was made mandatory for German products entering the British markets through the Merchandise Marks Act in 1887. Thereby, Britain sought to protect its industry explicitly by pointing out the lower quality of the German products compared to British products, and implicitly by appealing to the British sense of patriotism. Unfortunately for the British, it had the exact opposite effect in the long run. Around 1900, the German industry became more sophisticated, and then so did the product. So after a while, the label Made in Germany indicated good quality and not low quality. In fact, I read that some British manufacturers actually faked their label afterwards and put a Made in Germany sticker on that to sell their products. So they made their actual British products appear German even 120 years ago. And cars, as probably the most salient products coming out of Germany, have been contributing to this image and fostering this image to a large extent, and they also benefit in return from their origin, now known for building high-quality machinery, high-quality cars. And these companies know that, and they do make use of that fact in their brand communication. But as we've seen before, a country's identity, and therefore the image, consists of much more than just the plain information about the quality of the products, or logo, or slogan. As I see it, there are three main conditions that have to apply if you want to use a country of origin effect in order to be successful. First of all, does the overall country image match the criteria by which the respective product category is normally evaluated? I want to show you a commercial made by Volkswagen to see how they answered this. Okay, so apparently for Volkswagen, the answer is yes. Obviously, Volkswagen transferred a part of the national identity rooted in the perceived character of the population to their products, concluding that if the people are sincere, then so too are the cars. Second, spots like this one here can only be run if the product actually lives up to the expectations attached to the country of origin. Like we heard before, you can't brand what you can't have. If you still do, your brand will experience a severe loss of credibility, which is especially true for weaker brands that are not that well known yet. There is one more condition, and I'd like to show you another spot to explain to you what that is about. So, interestingly, there is a foreign brand that. Oh, shut this off. Okay, enough. So there was a foreign brand that, for this spot, borrowed the reputation of Germany as a car-producing country, and proved the first point. But you might have noticed there were some Nazi references, so it also brings up the last point that has to be taken into account before launching nationally charged commercials like this: possible conflicts arising out of historical, political, or sociological circumstances. It was intended for the UK market only, but it was heavily criticized, especially in Germany, because the eagle there in the back was really seen as absolutely inappropriate to communicate a country's image in order to make money. So I see there were some positive reactions. I don't know if there were negative ones in the room, but even though the country of origin and its creative embedment in brand communication might hit in some countries, but it might have the exact opposite effect in others. And that is not only reduced to long-lasting, in long-lasting historical terms, but also for, say, temporary moods caused by recent events. For instance, made in Germany would have worked very well 2 years ago in Greece, but I doubt it still does, and it maybe won't for quite some time. About the sociological part, it would be worth examining if ethnocentristic tendencies exist within the specific target group within a given market, because naturally nationalistic or ethnocentristic societal groups would oppose any product stressing its foreign origin. And since behavior patterns like this are closely correlated to very accessible variables such as age and education, it could easily and should be taken into account. The bottom line for country of origin effects in commercials would be there is no such thing as a general recipe. And also the nation brand index can provide you only with a rough idea about the general perception of your country internationally. Only if the criteria the product is generally evaluated by is congruent with the features associated with its country of origin, the relationship between the target market and the country of origin is conflict-free, and, more specifically, the likelihood to encounter ethnocentristic tendencies within the target group is low, then country of origin references can pose a powerful tool to enhance the brand image considerably. I would now like to switch over to the second example. Namibia is an example of a developing country that could really improve its international competitiveness if it did engage in strategic nation branding. Or more specifically, I'll be looking at the port of Walvis Bay as a very, very narrow case example. Concerning African countries in the world economy, Paul Kagame, the president of Rwanda, really put it in a nutshell, saying, when important institutions discuss the economy and business, they don't even mention Africa once. And then he goes on, but then again, why should they, since we can't manage to make them talk about us? And Rwanda is really just one out of many examples of developing countries facing the same problem in making themselves understood business-wise. When arguing in favor of doing nation branding for developing countries, a main criticism you hear very often is that, especially in the times of crisis, these countries have bigger problems to address than their reputation abroad. I would argue that the exact opposite is the case. I would say it never mattered more than today. Let's have a look at a couple of facts as to why that is. As a response to the crisis, foreign investors have been retracting large amounts of their capital from developing countries. As a matter of fact, the United Nations have registered a decrease of foreign direct investment in African developing countries of 36% in 2009 alone. Naturally, withdrawing capital causes a devaluation of the respective currency, making imports even less affordable. And also the exports suffer because, as an example, in Congo, some mines already shut down because China needed less cobalt for the production of its cell phones than it initially calculated. So all in all, the crisis hit those countries hardest that are least to blame for it. In addition to the fact that Africa hasn't been the most favored place for foreign investment in the first place. Now, a couple of facts about Namibia. Since its independence in 1991, Namibia has been a stable and peaceful democracy. The literate rate is at fairly high, 85%. It does share the region's problems concerning HIV, but it is nowhere near the corruption level of Zimbabwe, or has violent conflicts going on like Congo does, or even is close to the crime rate of South Africa. Namibia is also a member state of the South African Development Community, or SADC, which His Excellency the Ambassador of the Kingdom of Lesotho introduced yesterday, a regional organization aiming at the economic and political integration of the southern part of Africa, which is comparable to Mercosur in South America. And especially important in this respect is the Walvis Bay Corridor, an infrastructure network linking Namibia's largest port, Walvis Bay, with its SADC trading partners. And most important in this respect is the Gauteng region in South Africa around Johannesburg, which accounts for 9% of the GDP of the entire African continent. By improving the infrastructure network and therefore the transatlantic trade embedment of the region, government officials, business representatives, and aid agencies aim at stimulating the local economies. And besides the staff directly involved in corridor activity, so-called centers of growth along the corridors are envisioned to create job opportunities and thereby elevate the standard of living of the population in the long run. So it does have positive effects not only for businesses, but so for the theory, also for the people. About the port, it ranks among the best ports of the entire African continent. In fact, it has been elected port #1 for a couple of years consecutively. It does indeed operate very efficiently and reliable, as independent rankings clearly show. So it's not only the Walvis Bay Corridor Group who says this. And unlike other ports within SADC, Namport does not face the problems of recurring container congestions that cause cargo delays and therefore cost the respective companies enormous amounts of money. Due to its geography, Namport represents the fastest link between SADC and its trading partners in the Americas and Europe. Compared to the possibility of going through South African ports, freight forwarders, if they were to use the Walvis Bay port instead, could save up to 1 week in comparison to making use of these South African ports. However, despite these hard facts, Namport operates way below the capacity it is capable of. Despite factual evidence of Namport's superiority on many levels, the decision makers in the Americas and in Europe stick to traditional trade routes. And consequently, the attached infrastructure network is underutilized, and the positive effects on the economic development of Namibia fall short of its actual potential. When I talked to the representatives of the Walvis Bay Corridor Group, they pointed out that the main reason for this paradox are to be found in the images Namibia evokes overseas. So when it comes to terms as security and efficiency, which are after all then the most important features a port should possess. So speaking about the country of origin, in fact, the criteria your product or service is evaluated by. So basically, if you're not familiar with the country, it might look a little bit like this, which is that due to the lack of knowledge concerning Namibian qualities, the country suffers from the neighboring effect, or how Simon Anholt puts it, the continent branding effect. In case people are not familiar with a certain country, and therefore they have a somewhat vague idea about it, they tend to resort to the next higher category, which would be the continent. So Africa, and given the reputation vacuum, Namibia ends up absorbing images of violence, of war, corruption, and instability that are so prominently featured in our news every day, on BBC, on CNN, on Tagesschau, everywhere. These images may be accurate for some countries, but for many countries they are not. And they are very threatening, economically speaking. And as explained earlier, the more important the decision, the less do facts matter to you, and the more does your instinct. And certainly shifting cargo worth millions of dollars to through alternative networks does indeed pose such a decision, especially in the aftermath of this economic crisis when companies have become even more cautious. So I believe that for Namibia, the time has come to do something about its reputation, because not just because of the crisis, but also as a response to South Africa, which has enhanced its international visibility dramatically through the championship they hosted this year. I would say that by combining genuine features, which I would see as security, stability, efficiency, and continuity, coupled with its unique culture and history and nature, I think that the country would cleanse itself from unfavorable neighboring effects and, in a positive way, then stick out of the crowd. The country would become more salient for those in charge of planning overseas investments, and therefore may enhance its chance to find itself on a shortlist discussed in London or in Berlin, in Frankfurt or New York. So this would be my conclusion for Namibia. This is my last point, and in fact my last slide, so this would be the time for you to ask questions. But first, let me thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.